Okay, so this is the third video lecture on early childhood development. Now I want to switch topics from talking about physical growth to cognitive growth, and cognitive referring to how a child is able to think. Remember, keep in mind that children simply think differently. Their brains don't seem to work quite the same way, and there are different theorists who have made different observations in how and offer different explanations as to how a child moves through these different stages of cognitive understanding of thinking. You have Piaget, which you may remember from a previous chapter. He's quite famous. He's quite key in this understanding of how children think. And his theory is this notion or this observation that in this stage of life, children have what they call pre-operational intelligence, or sometimes another way to think about that is they're pre-logical. They don't really get logic yet. That a couple concepts that fall under this pre-logical thinking or this pre-operational is a phenomena called, or an observation called, egocentrism. And this is a tendency to think that they haven't yet developed a concept called theory of mind, which we'll talk about in another slide. And so children tend to think that everybody sees the same thing. There's a classic experiment where we set a child in front of this model mountain, and over on one side there's like trees and a pond, and on the other side there's not. And you ask a child to say, well, what I sit over here on the side without the pond, they sit on the side with the pond, and you ask the child to describe what they think I see. Well, they think that you see the same thing that they see because they're very egocentric in their understanding or the way that they think, and they haven't yet grasped that people think differently. There's another, oh golly, and I just pronounced it, centrism. That word right here. But it's the idea that when it's the idea that when two things happen together, so you take the word like synchronicity, when two things happen together, that one must have caused the other. So the example that's used in the textbook is if a child puts on their bathing suit, they must have caused summertime to happen because they only wear their bathing suit in the summertime. So the notion that these two things go together. And I'm trying to think of some other examples that aren't necessarily coming to me. Maybe putting up the Christmas tree and Santa Claus coming, right? That there's not really an understanding that there's other things that may go on that may have caused something. Animism is actually not just something that characterizes children's pre-operational thinking, but animism is when we give animal qualities to objects. We see this a lot actually in literature and religion and other things, but it's the notion that we give things life. And in this particular context, we're talking about like making things, maybe making the table and and imagining that the table has life or is an animal, right? And then we have one that's represented here in this picture, and that's called conservation error. And conservation error is the notion that you have a quantity of something, and that it's the inability to recognize that just because I break up the something into smaller or even more, like I break it up into smaller cups, that it's the same quantity. Or if I take a fluid in it, like you see in this image right here, you take the fluid from a short cup. I don't know where my mouse went. There it is. You take a fluid from a short cup and you put it into a tall cup. And if a child is making this conservation error, they'll think that there's more fluid in the tall cup simply because it's tall. What's really interesting about this, though, is this cognitive phenomena is used on us all the time when you go to restaurants, right? When you buy that, when they have tall, skinny glasses, and you think you're getting more as opposed to if it's in a short glass. But you and I would know that if this fluid was poured from this cup into this cup, we would know it's the same. But a child doesn't necessarily. Another one they use is a cracker. So they'll take a cracker, make it one big piece, and they'll break it apart and ask them, is this more or less? That a child will prefer the cracker that's in one big piece as opposed to the same cracker in two pieces because they don't understand they're making conservation error, and they don't understand that it's the same amount. But the point is that these are just some examples about how children don't have the logical thinking. They don't have the same ability to think logically the rest of us does. Okay, so now I want to move into Vygotsky, and as I may have hinted at in a previous lecture, Vygotsky is kind of in my I kind of like he's more my kind of guy because of his his emphasis on the importance of other people for learning. So Vygotsky's sociocultural theory of cognitive development basically says that the way children learn to think is through interaction with others and interaction with the environment. A really important concept here that if you have been in my other developmental class, we spend some time talking about is this idea of zone of proximal development. So the theory goes, and maybe we talked about it in here too, but the theory goes is that I'm capable of doing this all by myself, but there's this task over here that I'd like to be able to do. But this piece in between what I want to do, I can do with a little bit of help. The zone of proximal development is this space in between. So riding a bike is a pretty classic example, right? Like a kid can sit on the bike by themselves. They don't need any help. They want to be able to ride it down the street without any help, but they're not there yet. The zone of proximal development is illustrated in this picture because with a little bit of help, this kid can ride the bike with their parent. And the idea is that it's through it's through the more knowledgeable other, it's through social interaction with other people that we can help someone grow, we can scaffold their learning, right? We can support them as they learn to balance on the bicycle till they learn to pedal the bicycle down the street. And that is the zone of proximal development. What I can do if I have a little bit of help after I develop that skill, then I'll be able to do the next thing. But that's what we mean by scaffolding, helping to build. So if you are a child care worker, if you work with kids, or if you are a teacher, or if you just want to help your kids learn something new, the point is you have to offer them guidance and support right there at the sweet spot, at the zone of proximal development. Okay, to switch a little bit, other things we start to see in cognitive development in small children here is kids start to talk to themselves, right? Now, I was an only child, so I talk to myself. I still talk to myself, actually, and maybe you do too. And so maybe this will still relate a little bit to you. But Piaget argued that he called it private speech. And private speech was a way for a child to sort of work out problems. And I think this is why people still do it today. I know this is why I talk to myself. Sometimes I hear my husband in the shower talking to himself. We're trying to process something. But Piaget observed that children use this as a cognitive developmental tool that they're trying to work out, right? They're trying to talk something through. Vygotsky called it egocentric speech, and he argued that it was a way that we did it. What is that? He says unable to see from another person's perspective. That this egocentric speech was a phenomena that I can't quite take the position of another person, right? And so I'm also sort of practicing what that sort of looked like. But the point is that both of them acknowledge this as a tool that children use in order to develop cognitively. Okay, so I want to switch gears a little bit. And talk a little bit more about a group of, actually, I think I'm going to stop here and I'm going to come back and pick this one up because it's already been 8.5 minutes. So this is where I'll start in the next video.